So, yeah, so my talk now is going to be about theory. How does reincarnation work? Because I realized that the cases alone aren't enough unless we can understand them, unless we can understand reincarnation through them. There could be other ways. There have been suggestions of other ways of explaining these cases, like ESP and things like this. Or people who just reject the idea of survival of death altogether, and so want to explain them away in terms of social construction. So I think the theory, coming to some sort of a theoretical understanding, is very important. Okay, you can go on to the next one. What's a processual soul? What do I mean by that? A soul for me is synonymous with consciousness. This is one of the questions I had to ask myself in developing my course lectures, which became the book. What is a soul? Because people talk about, well, first of all, what is it that reincarnates, right? What survives death? What reincarnates? People say it's the soul. Well, what is the soul, right? The soul for me is synonymous with consciousness, and I got my aha moment on that. What brought me to that is reading an article by a theoretical physicist who Henry Stack is his name, who wrote about the compatibility of personal survival through consciousness with quantum theory, right? I mean, he's one of the quantum theorists who sees consciousness as being essential to understanding quantum mechanics. So that was the aha moment for me. If we imagine that survival of death, what survives death and what reincarnates, simply is consciousness, a stream of consciousness experience continuous with embodied life. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, the process part of it refers to the metaphysics of Alfred North Whitehead. Now, I'm not going to go into that because I know for many people, philosophy is not really their thing, and it goes over a lot of people's heads. But the processual refers to Whitehead. And it's in contrast to Descartes, basically, the Cartesian idea of a discrete soul, one that's never changing. Whitehead looked at consciousness as process, as a soul as process, as something that's continuous experience, continuous stream of experience. And so I don't know, we can get into in a philosophical way, is there still room for the Cartesian-like soul? But anyway, I chose processual soul theory as a way of indicating that what I'm talking about here, at least with consciousness, is something that's processed. Okay, go ahead. What's the next one? A processual soul is simply a stream of consciousness, a stream of experience. Go ahead. But the processual soul theory, my processual soul theory, is really neo-Whiteheadian. What's the next case? Because Whitehead thought that consciousness streams survived bodily death, right? But he thought because sensory inputs from the body's senses had stopped, people ceased having experiences. That is, the consciousness ceased having experiences. But Whitehead didn't allow for psi inputs out of death. Now, what are psi inputs? That's psychic inputs. This is the parapsychological term psi. What parapsychologists mean by that is, go ahead. With psi, a discarnate consciousness would be able to perceive through clairvoyance. This is what psi is for parapsychologists. Clairvoyance, communicate with telepathy, and act on the material world through psychokinesis, mind over matter, right? So if you've got clairvoyance to see, you've got telepathy to interact, and you've got psychokinesis to act, you don't need the body, right? You can do, the consciousness can do all of this stuff and have the inputs, and and continue then to have experiences without the body, right? And so that's why I say that my position is new. Okay, what's the next one? Now, discarnate agency is central to the processual soul theory. And what do I mean by discarnate agency here? You want to go into the next slide? Discarnate agency refers to the ability of a disembodied consciousness stream to receive sensory cues and to act with the aid of sight, just what I was describing. Okay. It's the basis of after-death communications through dreams. Next one. Also, mediumistic communications and some NDE phenomena. You know, all familiar with NDEs. They'll claim they saw something in the operating room, they saw something at the accident site that actually occurred. Right. That those perceptions occur through clairvoyance. Now, how does discarnate agency manifest then in reincarnation cases? Announcing dreams. Okay, so announcing dreams are dreams, I mentioned these before, are dreams that a pregnant woman has, or her husband or somebody close to her, maybe before she becomes pregnant. That's a dream about a person that is going to reincarnate in her child. That's what we call it, announcing dreams. Okay. Apparitions. Apparitions is the term for ghosts. Apparitions can be visual, they can be tactile, they can be auditory, any of the senses. Very often they're visual, but they don't have to be. Okay. Mediumistic communications. The deceased, right, during the intermission period between lives, the discarnate consciousness is interacting through a medium. Again, the connection is psychic, right? They're communicating with the medium through telepathy, and then the medium represents this. Pregnancy cravings. And this is interesting. In a lot of these cases, women have cravings. They turn out to be for foods, and sometimes it's wanting to do things too. It's not just cravings of foods. They turn out to be related to the previous person of the child that she's carrying.
That's hilarious.
Right. And sometimes the children after they're born, the mother no longer has the craving, but the child has the craving now. It's something it's one of these influences from the baby name suggestions. This is something else that's interesting. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but we hear about this a lot, that that women will be impressed with a name. They hadn't thought of this name. Yeah, you had that, both two of you at least. I've had this experience. You just suddenly, feel impressed with a name for this baby. You hadn't thought of it before, but you maybe give it to the baby. In Ryland's case, the name was given to Ryland as a second name. It turned out to be Jennifer's middle name too. Huh. Yeah. So the baby name suggestions, the names come to the women, and they turn out to be you can go on to the next one. They turn out to be the names of the previous people. So the most dramatic way involves choosing one's parents. And I mentioned this in relation to my daughter, where she told us that she had chosen us. And so we hear about this a lot. It's one of the stages of the intermission experience. And the stages of the intermission experience are very similar to stages of the NDE. If you're familiar with that, they talk about, leaving the body, being out of the body, returning to the body. Well, in reincarnation cases, the third stage is choosing the parents. So in choosing one's sex also, there are many cases where it seems that there is an intentional decision to return as one sex or the other. But it doesn't have to be just family. There can also be acquaintance. People can come back to friends. And if there's a family connection or acquaintance connection particularly, it does suggest intent, right, on the part of the discarnate consciousness. That's why I included it as part of discarnate agency. Anniversary effects, conception timing. This has to do with being born on significant days, being born on the same day as one was born in the previous life, being born on the day that one died or something, some significance to it. And this, yeah, one can say, oh, this is just by chance, but this happens often enough that one, after a while, one begins to wonder, is there something more than chance going on here? So what do I have for the next one after the conception timing? Because I can say a lot more about that, but miracle babies, yeah. Okay, so miracle babies is a really interesting subject when we're brought into this, to the reincarnation thing. In a number of these cases, we see the discarnate consciousness bringing about conception when it should not have been possible. Okay. Rylan, again, is an example of that. Her father had a vasectomy. Okay. We see this come about also when women have menopause, with tubal ligations, when there's been a disease of some sort. For some reason or another, the women are told that they can't have children, and yet they do. And the miracle baby things, they often show up under conditions where it's very clear that there was intent here. Okay, what's the next one, Carol? Suicide cases would be an example of this. There's suicide cases that lead to reincarnation are really very interesting. We see with suicide cases a very short intermission. And we see a great tendency to return in the family or to a friend. The way I think of this is that the self-killing brought with it, a particularly strong ability to make decisions for oneself, right? And so for some reason, they choose to very often come back in the family, or they come to a friend, right? Okay, and so what's the next one? International cases. We see very similar things with international cases. Okay, so an international case is simply where a reincarnation is to another country. It's international. In this research, what we see is that the reincarnation is in the same general area, in the same vicinity, in the same culture. It seems to require a particular intent to reincarnate in another culture, in another country, reincarnate internationally. And when we look at international cases, the ones that have been solved, and there are not many solved international cases, but with all solved international cases, we see indications of intent to go to that particular place. Okay, so now in a more general way, how do I understand reincarnation? I understand it as possession of a new body, right? By the stream of consciousness. And that possession may come at any point during gestation. So it doesn't have to come at conception. There are a number of cases in which the intermission between lives was less than 9 months, right? And so this idea that you find in many religions that it have to come at conception, or we hear more about Drew's ideas where it actually comes at birth. There are many cases in which, in fact, when we talk about Rabia, we learn, an intermission of 6 months, and we have to understand that there are many cases like this where the possession of the new body can come at any point during gestation. It does not have to come at birth. And then it can come after birth as well. And this is something that gives a lot of problems when trying to understand reincarnation. There are cases that Stevenson studied, and that have been studied after Stevenson, in which there was a replacement, and I call these replacement cases. I call this replacement reincarnation because what seems to happen after birth is that the consciousness that possessed the body when it was born leaves, and another consciousness stream comes in and replaces it, right? And these cases are unusual, but we have several of them now. And they look like the possession cases, possession after birth. They look very, very much like other reincarnation cases. The only difference is that the possession came after birth. Stevenson thought of them as possession versus reincarnation. And what I'm trying to suggest is that if reincarnation is thought of as possession, it doesn't matter. It can be possession before birth, it can be possession after birth. It's just the possession of the body by the consciousness stream. And that's why I call the afterbirth ones replacement reincarnation. Congenital physical anomalies, like birthmarks, birth defects, are psychogenic. I mean, remember earlier I promised to explain how it's possible to have the physical things transfer. I think psychogenetic, that is, they're produced by the reincarnating consciousness acting on its new body. The mind, psychogenic, simply means produced by the mind, right? Produced by the consciousness stream. The idea here is that a birthmark, birth defect, or it can be a disease, it can be any sort of physical thing, trait, is part of the deceased self-image, right? It's part of their idea of themselves. And it's such a powerful part of the idea of themselves, they then carry that forward to their new body, right? And so I think that's how we see these physical things transferred over, how they become part of the new body. Now, and this is important, this is one. The psychogenic process can result in marks appearing after birth in replacement cases, right? So there are replacement cases where birthmarks appear after the replacement, right? They weren't there before. And that would make sense on the psychogenic model. It's very hard to explain otherwise. Now, this is something that we're just beginning to explore, and it's still an idea at this point, but there's some suggestive evidence that the reincarnating consciousness affects not only bodily processes, its tissues, but can actually maybe affect the genome or epigenetic mechanisms. And if that can happen, then the traits can be carried forward into next generations. And that's what we see in some cases. And that's what, when we see that, that's what suggests that maybe there's a genetic factor involved here. But we're still at the stage of of just beginning to see this. It hadn't been investigated yet. Okay, another key part of the processual soul theory is understanding consciousness as duplex, of having conscious awareness and having a subconscious also. Explicit, implicit memories registered in the subconscious part of the mind. Explicit memories are memories, are the conscious memories. Implicit memories are behavioral and emotional memories. Implicit, implicit, these are sort of standard memory. These aren't my terms. These are standard memory researcher terms. Okay, so when reincarnation occurs, according to my theory, there is the reset of conscious awareness, right? The tabula rasa thing, right? That we're born, and it's said that we're that everything is wiped clean. It's wiped clean only at the conscious level, not at the subconscious level, I believe. But go ahead. At the subconscious level, the past life memories continue inside and they continue to influence it. And this is something Qatar will be talking about when he gets into his talk about the more psychological things. And this maybe, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so consciousness evolved. I believe that reincarnation began when life began. And this is something that's more and more is coming out about. It turns out that bacteria they're finding that single-celled organisms like bacteria can learn. If they can learn, they can remember, right? So memory is not something that's simply in the brain. It's not something in the nervous system. It's something that all of life has. So, yeah. So I think as soon as there was bodily death, there was survival of the consciousness stream that animated the body. So this work with bacteria suggesting that consciousness goes back to the very origins of life, because all of life that we know it, goes back, builds on the single-celled organisms such as bacteria. So if we're talking about consciousness, then we're talking about the origins of consciousness. And I think that's when reincarnation began, right? It didn't begin with human beings. It didn't begin with cats and dogs. It began with bacteria. It began, earlier with single-celled organisms. It's always been with us. Go ahead. And that would mean then that all life possesses consciousness. All right. That doesn't mean, though, that all consciousness is equal. At first, maybe that consciousness would have been subconscious only. And then conscious awareness may have appeared along with brains. This is something I'm beginning to question now. I mean, when I made up the PowerPoint, that's where I was at. This new book that I'm reading called The Sentient Cell, it's making me more aware of some of the research on this, which is suggesting that it's maybe not just subconscious, but maybe they argue in that book, with a lot of data, that even bacteria may have a conscious awareness. So I may not be right about that. In this case, then the duplex level type of consciousness goes all the way back too. It's not just subconscious and then conscious awareness that we all experience, develop later. It may be that both levels of consciousness go all the way back to the beginning of consciousness. And what that means, so each species has its own consciousness. But what that suggests to me, and this is something that the mainstream workers haven't caught on yet, but I think that what this suggests to me is that consciousness really originated outside of the physical body, right? I mean, it's separate from the physical form, and the consciousness became connected with physical form very, very early. In fact, it may turn out that consciousness had something to do with directing the origins of life, helping it to come into being. Okay, each species has its own consciousness. Transmigration unlikely. I need to say something about what I mean by transmigration. So I use reincarnation to mean rebirth in species lines. I use transmigration to mean rebirth across species lines. So what we see in most of these cases, right? In the human cases, we see past lives as humans. There, every once in a while, there'll be a claim to have been a non-human animal. None of those claims are really very good. The evidence for that is not very good. There are also accounts of cats coming back as dogs, and switching. Some of those are more interesting, but I'm not totally convinced by them either. I think the evidence is much better for cats coming back as cats, dogs coming back as dogs, not always in the same breed, but in the same species. That I think is fairly good. But so I think each species has its own type of consciousness, which is consistent with the sort of the sentient cell argument and some of the things that I'm reading now that come out of more and more mainstream ideas, where the idea of consciousness has evolved.
Dr. Luc Montagnier is a Nobel laureate, and he's famous for an experiment where he had a column of purified water and a column of purified water. And in this column, he put DNA, and then he shone light through it, and DNA formed in the water where there was no DNA. So it sort of implies like a waveform So I'm wondering if you're thinking that consciousness exists in a quantum field and that it can, find the avatar, if you will, or the body.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that experiment. That's interesting. I don't, I suppose something like that. I mean, there has to be some way that this would have,
Cool.
develop a consciousness would have, acted on the primordial soup, as they call it,
Right.
and, somehow. So, conceivably something like that.
Yeah, it seems like water has memory, like if we think about homeopathy, so.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is this book is called The Sentient Cell, and so, and they argue that consciousness, that all cells of whatever sort, I mean, living cell, are conscious.
Yeah.
Fully conscious. So
Who was that book by again?
I'm sorry.
Who was that book by again? Ascension?
It's by three authors, and
Okay,
I'm
we'll
not
look
going to
it up.
recall the name there.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Here you go. Great talk.
Okay.
I've got three questions. What is the phrase stream of consciousness rather than consciousness? Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. Yeah, that partly comes from Whitehead, who talked about the stream of experience. And the idea is simply that, it's not just consciousness, it's that there's this stream, that consciousness exists in a stream of experience or a stream of
So it's not
events.
synonymous with consciousness. Consciousness
Well-
is the thing and stream of consciousness is phenomenon. Question.
Right. I guess I haven't really asked the question at that philosophical level, but yeah, I mean, I guess I would argue that the experience of consciousness,
Right.
it occurs in this stream. Consciousness in itself, if you take it apart from the stream, yeah, I mean,
It's a
I
thing.
don't like calling consciousness energy because I think it's its own thing. But so whatever it is, right? But it is experienced
As
through the
phenomenon.
stream of stream of phenomena.
Question two, he mentions replacement cases. Are any of those solved?
Yeah.
How do you solve a replacement case where somebody was somebody and they became somebody else?
Well, the same way. I mean, in these replacement cases, okay, they're in the replacement cases, typically, somebody will die or seem to die, and then they will revive, claiming to be somebody else.
I know
They
some
claim to be
experience.
somebody else,
Oh, not.
and they have a completely different memory set, they have a completely
these are
different
solved.
personality set. Yeah, and the people they claim to be are identified.
You were Joe and you woke up Mary.
Right, and you say I'm Mary, and you say Mary had this or that, lived in this and that place, and the researchers go and they find there was indeed this Mary who died shortly before this happened.
Now, you mentioned this thing about genome changes in DNA. Is there evidence for that? Or is that
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We don't have good hard evidence for it yet. What we're beginning to see is in some cases there are indications, like sometimes birthmarks and other physical signs will appear in successive generations, right? Now we know that this can occur outside of, well, we don't know that it occurs outside of reincarnation. We know that there are cases of this, right, of birthmarks occurring in several generations, and they're considered hereditary, right? I mean, this is something that's recognized. What we see in the reincarnation case is perhaps an explanation for that. We see a birthmark being hereditary, but we also have the original generation in which it appeared and a past life memory of that in that original generation. And what that suggests is that the birthmark in the original generation was caused in this psychogenic way, but then it affected the genome and then was passed down to successive generations.
I read Stevenson's book where he shows pictures of these phenomena.
Right.
And they actually were able to, for other generations, had them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's right. That's right. Well, yeah, I mean, in his book, what he was more talking about is successive reincarnation generations happen to them. So that's the person who reincarnated, in the next life, maybe in a different family, in a different body,
But not genetic. You can see.
but not genetic. And he didn't have any examples of what I'm talking about
That's
now.
it. Thank you.
Now, I investigated a case where it was one of these suicide cases, and the youth who killed himself had a cleft chin. Okay, now cleft chin is something that we know is genetic, right? It ran in his family. The cleft chin ran in his family. He was reincarnated as his best friend's son. His best friend's girlfriend was pregnant at the time, and he returned to that. Okay, right. And the child had a cleft chin. The cleft chin did not run in the girl's family. All right. Now, what we have to wait and see is, do his children then have a cleft chin?
And if they do, it's
Because
genetic.
if they do, it's genetic, right? And that would be an example of what I'm talking about here.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll make this away.
Well, that's fine. It's right.
Right. Well, okay, about the birthmark. If you are close to me, you'll see I have a mole right here. My mother has that mole. My
Okay.
grandmother had that mole.
Okay.
And my great grandmother had
Right.
that mole.
Okay.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Right. An example of the
Right.
genetic transmission of moles.
And then this is kind of interesting to me, and I'd never heard all of these things that you're saying, but I noticed it with my brother. My late brother was heavily decorated military. He died in 2018. My living brother and we like history, family history. We're from Virginia. And so my late brother's name is Edward Colston Newton, the fifth, and he went by the name Coley. My current brother's name is John Newton, John Tyler Newton. And so what's interesting is my brother, he looks like my father's mother's side, the Van Winkles. Okay, my late brother,
Okay.
Coley. John looked up the history of some family names, Newton, and we found on the northern side, I was talking about this earlier, a Major General John Newton.
Okay.
My brother Coley, who looks like my father's mother's side, Van Winkle, looks identical to Major General John Newton. My brother's John, my brother Coley's dead. Major General John Newton.
Uh-huh.
And he's not related to the Van Winkles.
Right.
And everybody that knows my brother knows that's my brother's face.
Wow.
Right.
So it's interesting, military. If you know my brother, you'll know that looks identical to my brother. I split their faces so you could see.
Oh, wow.
Whoops.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
But do you all understand? This gentleman here is not related to my father's mother,
Right.
Van Winkle.
Wow.
But my brother looks like the Van Winkles.
Mm.
And my brother John is alive, and this man's name is John Newton.
Yeah.
It gives me chills when I talk about it.
Yeah.
Soul transmission and.
And they're both highly decorated military.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to be very careful with physical likenesses. I know there's a big tendency to use them in a diagnostic way, and we don't in reincarnation research. When they occur, in family lines in particular. But here you have an example of one that doesn't occur in the family line, right? And that's more suggestive, isn't it?
Right.
Of the, of there being a reincarnational impact, and would be an example of what I'm talking about with the psychogenetic influence, the influence of the incoming consciousness on the new body, the psychogenic
Right.
process there. Right. Yeah, a nice example. Yeah, go ahead.
So, can I just say?
Yeah, you need to stand. No, apparently you need to go up
So
here.
I don't know if
and
anybody has
speak up.
ever experienced this, but I had an experience where I was in a coffee shop and a girl walked up to me and she goes, "Oh my God." Not bad. She goes, she's literally going, "You look exactly like my father." Exactly.
Wow.
and she's literally looking me up and down. So, I mean, I wonder, it's like, that was that, like, physical, is that just a coincidence?
Yeah, well, it may be. I mean,
You know
it
what I
could
mean?
be, it could be just a coincidence. We really can't know. But what would be more interesting is if it turned out that you had the personality for father, you know, that there were other things then that suggested that you were the reincarnation of her.
Yeah, I don't know, but we didn't talk.
You didn't
But I
talk,
mean-
yeah.
But I mean, it
Yeah.
was, I'm just kind of going, okay, but the way she's just literally like scanning my body and
Right.
looking me up closely in the face and going, oh my God, you're him,
Right,
you're him.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have to be really careful with things like that because, you know, it's too easy to overread them. But on the other hand, like I said, I mean, with what we've seen in the research is that very often we'll return, you know, in the same region, in the same culture at least. And that the international cases there are relatively few of them. You know, and if we all do that regularly, then it stands to reason that we'll run into each other again. Right, very often. And so we hear a fair number of these instances where people feel like, you know, they've encountered somebody they knew before. Very often it's just a, you know, an emotional feeling, you know, but, you know, sometimes, but you're given an example of a physical thing. So it's really, but it could just be a coincidence. I mean, you know,
That's what I want.
we just don't know. It could be. You don't think so now with him?
Come on, Alan.
You know, by the way, I mean, Carol, her name Carol, and from the day I met her, I called her Caroline. And it become up the past life, her name Caroline. And to explain that, I don't have any explanation, but I tried to call her Carol. I couldn't. It's always Caroline come to my mind. What a coincidence! And we become really working together on a lot of stuff. I want to mention something. I was waiting to mention it in my time. I don't want to take much from my friend Jim about the birthmark. The birthmark is related to our culture, Lebanese, Druze.
I think you need to speak up a little bit.
A little bit higher.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to relate the birthmark to our culture, especially in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. We believe when the woman pregnant and she feel like she want to eat something, craving. And mostly she think about fruit. That's most likely. And they always rush to get that fruit to her because we believe, we afraid if she touch her body at the same time she craving, that mark, it will go exactly at the same place. And which some related cases, which one of my brother case, my mom, she craved some what they call it, some liver. And he became have a one on his chest like that. He just all the way big in his chest. And that's really, I don't want to take much time, but I want to mention that. And we really believe that. And we always rush. My wife, when she was pregnant, my oldest daughter, and she wanted to eat grapes. And, you know, back in the village, in that area, we cannot find the grapes all year long, and just only the season. Right. And I was rushing and begging those people, please get me something. I want to take it to my wife. That really, it's really how related to each other, as in even with a different culture, doesn't matter where we are, we have so much in common, so much similarity in the way we think, and we'll go back similarity to our genetic from the day God created.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Kurtar.
I'd like your assessment of a situation in which I saw a woman across the room and there was an immediate recognition, and in a past life experience, I recognized her as a grandparent of a woman that I married, and I was helping take care of her. I don't know whether she was the grandmother or grandfather, but I felt something. Is that unusual?
No, it doesn't seem to be. It doesn't, this sort of thing does not seem to be unusual. And like I say, I mean, it's what we would expect, right? If we all routinely reincarnate in the same area, we're gonna run into each other again. You know, and very often, I mean, another thing there is that, you know, seeing the person apparently brought up the memory, right? You had the flash of memory, the flash of understanding of how you were related to her when you
That
saw the
was in
woman.
a session where
That was
I
in a session, that was separate.
regression,
Okay.
regressed.
Right, okay. Yeah, I thought if it had come up at that time, that would illustrate something else. And that is how past life memories are often triggered by circumstance, by things we see or do.
I meant to say one more. Okay, sorry. So when my late brother passed away in 2018, I've always been interested in reincarnation since I was 5 when I thought it up. That was my idea. And so one night I was in, and there was a question to this. I was in bed and I was thinking about reincarnation. And I was wondering if an artist like myself, portrait specifically artist, had come out of the Northern Neck where I grew up in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Okay, the question I'm having is something telling me to wonder that, or is that my own thought? But then I Google it. And there is a famous woman named Catherine Carter Pritchard, and she came out of the Northern Neck. And I thought, how cool is that? Now, I started reading about it, and I started going, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
Her father and my father were both the Commonwealth's attorney. She's 100 years before me.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Her older brother, I get chills. Her older brother was John. My older brother is John. She couldn't learn French to save her. My mother taught French, and I'd never been able to learn it in 5 years taking it. She was a portrait artist. When I was 4 and we did our portrait in preschool, everybody else drew spiders and octopuses. I drew a complete person. I mean, every detail there was. I have
Right.
never drawn a stick figure in my life.
Right.
I was that gifted artist, you know, and I've always been obsessed with getting it right, you know.
Right.
So I just found that interesting. And also she ended up going to Taos, New Mexico, I read about.
Huh.
And she was the first person to paint the natives as they were. And she did this for over 20 years. And that was her haven. First woman to be indoctrinated or whatever into that men's society of artists there. She was the first woman to open a school in France for Americans to be able to study the art back 100 some odd years ago. So she was pretty remarkable, but of course she's a woman, nobody talks about it. So anyway, what I found was interesting, I said, Taos, New Mexico. I did a regression 2 years prior, not understanding anything that I saw, but I saw Pueblo buildings. I saw an intersection, which I knew was in New Mexico. And there was the building and there was the mountains in the back. And then when I see the Taos, New Mexico, okay, I get chills again. I've had an obsession when it came to men since I was 4 or 5 with the Hispanic, the dark, the black hair, the black looks, the Native Americans and all of that. I don't remember those memories, or do I? But our lives are parallel.
Right.
So that's what I was like, is that just me trying to fill me in there? Or is that, it's so coincidental that I just think it's quick, kind of weird.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, so you're right. I mean, it may very well be more than coincidence. You may have had some subconscious, like I was saying. I mean, these the memories do not have to be conscious to influence us.
Mhm.
You know, they can be subconscious and they can still influence us. And I think that's something Qatar will be talking more about.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. So my question is a little bit about, you know, how do you bring the evidence in for people who, like myself, I'm a medium.
Okay.
And if you knew me 2 years ago when I went to Carroll, I'm the most right-brained corporate America flying under the radar medium you'll ever meet. And I had to have proof, and there was proof, and there have been crimes that have been solved and other things too.
Okay.
But when this, you know, we recently did a meditation before this, leading up to this event, and I had a knight come and sit next to me, and he's been around me for a while. Took his helmet off and said, "You need to remember who you are." And then I had lots and lots of memories come kind of flooding through of me and him. But I was sitting on a throne. I thought, okay, everyone thinks they're a queen in a past life. This is so cliche, right? Like I'm ever the skeptic thinking, no way, right?
That's great.
But then he said, Queen Regent of Bohemia. And I was like, well, that's oddly specific. And I don't know what a Queen Regent is. He showed me Austria. He showed me, like, I saw the person in the mirror. I saw lots of memories. And so then I went and Googled Queen Regent of Bohemia. There was only one. She looked identical to the person that I saw. She was born in 1717. My birthday is 7/17.
Oh.
And it's a significant date in a lot of my family's history.
Okay.
And she died in Vienna. My grandmother died in Vienna on vacation. And my grandmother had come to me earlier that day and said, there's going to be something significant today.
Okay.
So my question to you is, how much of that would you consider to be factual, right? Versus kind of a hope and a wish and you conjured some of that up.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good question. So much in this area is sort of like that, where it's suggestive, but there's not enough there for us really to be sure.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Okay, but it certainly is suggestive, isn't it? I mean, it's certainly
it's a lot.
suggestive.
Yeah.
I mean, but we can't make anything, we can't come to any conclusive definition, conclusions about it.
Sometimes we have an inner voice.
Mhm.
The inner voice sometimes will lead you to somewhere. If the memory, it's a complicated memory, it's coming from everywhere. That's sometimes we cannot do people not to separate it.
Right.
But it's lots of memory because the memory it already exists. All the past lives, the memory already there.
Right.
Just sometime will come the time, I believe, you will able to separate it and just having little bit much.
Separate the memory
Absolutely.
from the messages that
Exactly.
I'm receiving. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can say it's consistent. I mean, you know, those experiences.
I'm listening. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can certainly say, you know, we can say more than it's suggestive, I guess. We can say it's consistent with this, you're actually having been here.
Okay.
We could say that.
Well, thank
So-
you.
Yeah, sure.
Wasn't this fascinating? We could talk days about this stuff.
I'm sure.
And Jim and Hatara and I have. But we can't thank you enough for all of this. And Lindsay, to answer your question, I've been gathering notes. I'm going to get emotional. For 34 years of snippets like what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And putting them in files, and then I get enough of the pieces of the puzzle to piece together stories. And I have 3 of my past lives that I have been able to verify. I didn't do any research until I had the memories. And I'll just give you an example of one.
Speak up.
Yeah.
He's really enjoying that.
Yeah, so
I'll thank you later. Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
This one life, I had a snippet of a memory as I'm walking down the beach. I get a name, Marco Antonio, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, Marco Antonio. You hear all the stories about people remembering famous people. So I just, you know, put it in a file, set it aside. But later on, months later, I get another thing that had the same kind of I'm an energy worker, so I know energy.
Mhm.
And this time it had the same kind of energy as when I got the name Marco Antonio. This time it was Domineus. Now, I don't know Latin from anything, but my daughter happened to be studying Latin. So I called her up and I asked her, what the hell does Domineus mean? Pardon my French. And then, so I'm a medium also. And then I get a hit later on, I think this was years later. I'm at a funeral in a Roman Catholic church and I'm getting really, really angry.
Mhm.
Just this visceral anger's coming over me. I can't wait to get out of the church. I'm at a funeral, so I need to be respectful, but I'm getting really angry. I leave the funeral, I go in my car, roll the windows up and do primal scream to release some of that anger stuff. And I hear this quiet voice say, go to the library. I'm thinking, what? I'm supposed to go to the cemetery, but I know that voice and I go to the library. I get to the library and now I'm really angry and I'm saying, okay, where am I going? In my mediumship, I do psychometry, which is using my left hand as a Geiger counter. And I am drawn into the reference section to one specific book. I open the book up to Marco Antonio de Dominius.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a gazillion stories like that. So what I'm saying is, like researchers, experiencers, you have to be extremely patient and what am I thinking of? I can't think of the word.
Systematic.
Systematic, thank you very much. But these things come together. As a philosopher, I believe it is when your soul knows you're ready for all of those things to make sense. At least that's the way it happened for me. Anyway, you've sparked so many wonderful conversations. It's just going to get better.